The Egyptian Code, the mystery of 10,500 BC, which is, of course, about 12,500 years ago, putting this around the time of the Younger Dryas period and the Clovis comet impact. And according to Brandon West from the Project Global Awakening, in Robert Duval's 2008 book, The Egyptian Code, in his typical meticulously researched style, he sets out to prove the theory that the ancient Egyptians built their pyramids on the Memphite necropolis, not in a random, haphazard fashion, but to reflect the cosmos in order to unite heaven and earth. And here he says, I'll present the core idea and evidence from Robert Duval's book, The Egypt Code, that validate the existence of a high civilization that existed on this earth around 12,000 years ago. Now, it's important that we find out as much as we can. I'm sure we're going to find out a lot more things tomorrow. The scientists that discovered these huge columns extending 2 kilometers below the Giza Plateau pyramids will come out with a video on that. So we're going to learn a lot more. These are not just the pyramids themselves, but there's 2 miles down structures going down. And there's a whole city underneath, they claim. And this, of course, proves what the ancient Greek historians wrote about the luxurious underground cities underneath the Giza pyramids seems to be true. Now, what was going on down there? Now, were these underground cities above ground at one point, and they were covered up by the sands of some cataclysm, or were they purposely built underground? We'll find out when tomorrow's video comes out. Now, going back to this, it's important because, for one, it's essential that we understand the truth of our history and the truth of human origins and what's going on, what went on in the past. They had tremendous technology that we don't even have today. We don't even, with today's technology, have the ability to build such pyramids. Now, if there indeed was a high civilization on this earth 12,000 years ago, capable of fantastic feats of architecture, engineering, and science, how would that change our perception of ourselves? And secondly, there's a lot of ancient knowledge and wisdom that the ancient Egyptians possessed, which are no longer remembered today, they're forgotten. And in the words of Robert Duval, he said, I hope that the new generation of Egyptologists will come to see, as I did, that ancient Egypt is not a defunct civilization to be studied in a dispassionate way, but rather a cultural model that is very much alive and needs to be understood, with perhaps some of its principles put again into practice for the benefit of mankind, obviously. This is from the Egypt Code, page 187. So what we're concerned about here is, more or less, is the origin of the myth that Egypt is made in the image of heaven. In his book, The Egypt Code, Robert Duval equates this with the creation myth of Heliopolis, where they give the genealogy of the pantheon of gods and how their interactions created heaven, earth, and air, and so on. In page 44, he concludes, this is probably where the idea came from that the image of the sky had been imprinted on the land and made Egypt the image of heaven. But what if the origins of that myth was not actually a myth at all, but architectural in origin? And what if it was actually much more than ancient, much more ancient? What if it was a memory that had been passed on to future generations, and that it had been mythologized once to the meaning of the memory that had been forgotten by some, maybe even the majority? And this is what I believe to be the case. And let us begin with the pyramids, he says. The mystery of the pyramids, it's almost unanimously accepted by scholars that the Great Pyramid of Giza was built around the date 2500 BC. This is based on the assumptions that the Khufu built the Great Monument of Giza, the Great Pyramid, which places it nicely around the peak of Pyramid Age in Egypt, when it's undeniable that the Egyptians undertook a massive pyramid building project. Yet there are some idiosyncrasies, obviously, especially with the new discoveries of these huge columns underneath. No other pyramid in Egypt comes close to the Great Pyramid, especially the ones which we know were built during the Pyramid Age, many of which have been reduced to a pile of rubble today. There is also the unexplained fact that it appears as if the building skill of the ancient Egyptians declined over time instead of improved. And yet the Great Pyramid still stands, even though its outer layer of white limestone was mined off to build the city of Cairo, and it remains today virtually unaffected. Not to mention the fact that the ancient Egyptians themselves never even claimed to have built the Great Pyramid of Egypt of Giza. There is only one piece of evidence which Egyptologists used to date the pyramid to 2500 BC, and it's the cartouche of Khufu's name that was written on the wall in red ochre paint in an isolated little space within the Great Pyramid that we had to use dynamite to blast our way into. And nowhere else in the entire pyramid is there a single inscription except in this space that was enclosed even before the pyramid was fully completed. And this to me is suggestive that the fact that the ancient Egyptians never even got inside of the Great Pyramid, simply because, as we know, they put inscriptions on everything and about everything. So basically the official story of the dating of the pyramid is that we allegedly know it was built around 2500 BC because of an alleged original cartouche painted on the wall, and not even inscribed, in a room that the builders would have fully believed that no one would have ever entered again. And that to me sounds as flaky as the official 9/11 story. Perhaps the same people were behind it. Of course, this is cynical. The other piece of evidence that admittedly is much more convincing dates the Great Pyramids to 2500 BC was uncovered by Robert Bouval. He discovered that the southern shaft of the king's chamber points to the star of Orion's belt, as they were in 2500 BC, Graham Hancock's quest for the lost civilization, Heaven's Mirror. And this is far more convincing evidence that it could have been then built, but yet it still does not resolve the fact that the Egyptians never claimed to have built the Great Pyramid, and that a star map is created on the ground by the Giza Pyramid, specifically indicating 11,541 BC, as we'll see, as well as the simple fact that these pyramids were beyond Egypt's level of technology at the time, as they are probably even beyond our level of technology today. And this should, if we are open-minded, lead us to at least consider that it was built in an earlier time. The older date for the pyramids? The 5th century BC historian Herodotus called Egypt the gift of the Nile. The Egyptians themselves went a lot further. They claimed that their sacred river had its source among the stars. Robert Bouval, The Egypt Code, page 33. In Robert Bouval's book, The Egypt Code, in his meticulously researched style, he provides a lot of highly persuasive evidence that Egyptians built their pyramids in the Memphite necropolis to reflect the heavens. And he realized that when observing the Memphite necropolis from a northerly perspective, specifically from an ancient site known as Letopolis, he found that while looking south along the Nile, some of the major ancient sites would have created a star map with the Nile symbolically representing the Milky Way galaxy. The Egyptian Code, page 106. The city of Heliopolis would have been closest to the vantage point south and to the left of the Nile, which, as he shows in his book, was an ancient cult center that revolved around stars, but also later around the sun god Ra. He further provides convincing evidence. The Egypt Code, page 79 to 95, that Ra was later coalesced with the stellar god Horakti, or Horus of the horizon, who was often symbolized as a recumbent lion, merging to create a deity Ra, Hortaki, Ra, Horus of the horizon. In Robert Bouval's own words, being such attentive observers of the constellations to the point of obsession, and let's remember even the Antikythera device of the ancient Greeks was measuring not only eclipses and the movements of the sun and moon and the stars and our solar system, but also the changing of the constellations. Why would they do that if they didn't have a need to learn? Now, being such attentive observers of the constellations, Bouval says, to the point of obsession, it would be very odd indeed if the priests of Heliopolis did not take particular notice of the lion-shaped constellation that housed the sun at the time of year, and which was the perfect metaphor for Ra, or Taiki, the merging of Ra with the cosmic lion. The Egypt Code, page 85. Therefore, Heliopolis would have represented the constellation Leo in the sky. And then further south to the right, west of the Nile, this time, we have the Great Pyramids of Giza, which clearly are aligned to represent Orion in the sky. Curiously, they are in the right alignment according to the Nile, as well as to reflect the relationship between the Milky Way and the Orion constellation in the sky. And then further south again, on the right west of the Nile, we have a small cluster of Abu Sir pyramids, which would represent the Pleiades constellation, creating a sky map on the ground with a triangular relationship of Leo, Orion, Pleiades, all accounted for on the ground, and all located in sync with the Nile to represent the Milky Way. The only thing is that about 2500 BC, the Nile, which runs south-north, would have been perpendicular to the Milky Way in the sky, which would have been parallel with the horizon at the time. Egypt Code, page 107. This is where things get interesting, and where Bouval courageously and admirably follows the evidence, even though it breaks away from convention. Was there a time when the Milky Way would have been running in a north-south direction in the sky, so that it was in alignment with the Nile, and so that this star map was a mirror image of heaven instead of an image that had to be rotated 90 degrees for it to be a match? And Bouval believes so. The star map of Memphis necropolis, based off the Sothic cycle, which relates to the ancient Egyptian calendar, which played an important role in the Egypt Code, but which is unfortunately beyond the scope of this article. Robert Bouval decided to turn back the heavens, which change over time, to the phenomenon called the precession of the equinoxes, to arrive at the date 11,501 BC. The amazing thing is that on the date of 11,541 BC, the Milky Way would have actually been turned 90 degrees compared to how it appeared 2,500 BC, and this time, instead of running perpendicular to the Nile, it runs parallel with the Nile and perpendicular to the horizon, actually giving the appearance that the Milky Way, the cosmic river, is flowing directly into the Nile River. And thus, when the Egyptians claimed that their Nile was sourced in the stars, with this was not merely a myth. This was a direct reference to a much older date, when it actually looked as if this was the case, albeit from an imaginative and poetic perspective. And amazingly, when we observe the stars and the alignments of the pyramids from this vantage point, the two brightest stars of Orion make the angle of 43 degrees 20 minutes with the north-south meridian, and the two largest pyramids of Giza, Khufu's and Khafre's, also make an angle of 43 degrees 20 minutes with the north-south meridian. And they are both positioned to the left of the Nile Milky Way, a perfect star map on the ground. And moreover, as Heliopolis, which as we've seen was dedicated to the god Ra, which was sometimes symbolized as a lion, would have mirrored on the ground the location of the constellation of Leo, and the pyramids of Abu Sir were in the correct location, although not perfect, to represent the Pleiades star cluster. And in the words of Robert Bouval, controversial as this may at first seem, we have also seen how when the sky is precessed to 11,451 BC, and the three stars of Orion are aligned along the meridian with the three pyramids of Giza, the image of Zeb Tepi in the sky, the triangular region of Orion, Pleiades, Leo, bears an uncanny resemblance to the image of Zeb Tepi on the ground, the triangular region of Giza, Memphis, Heliopolis. Egypt Code, page 184. And now, in the Egypt Code, Bouval provides this as solid evidence that the ancient Egyptians built their pyramids on the Memphite necropolis according to a master plan to reflect the image of heavens in Egypt, thus fulfilling the belief that Egypt was made in the image of heaven, as we discussed at the beginning of the article. I agree with Robert Bouval wholeheartedly. In part, it's clear that during the Pyramid Age, which comprised the 3rd to 6th dynasties between 2686 and 2181 BC, the ancient Egyptians did embark on a zealous pyramid building project, and the evidence strongly suggests that they built according to a master plan to mirror the heavens in Egypt. After all, how could all of those alignments be chalked up to pure coincidence? But is there not another explanation? The ancient legacy from Zep Tepi, as explained previously, and not very much detail, and we'll soon write a whole article on based on scientific evidence and mysterious nature of the Giza, the Great Pyramid. I do not believe that it was built around 2500 BC, and I believe the evidence supports this. Even if we look at this truly groundbreaking, ingenious theory that Robert Bauval has proposed, there are a couple of things that don't sit right with me. Namely, the fact that Giza pyramids are aligned to a single arc minute to perfect reflect the constellation of Orion as it appeared 11,451 BC, whereas Heliopolis and Abu Sir pyramids are much less exact and are merely built in the right places so as to resemble the location of the stars, but not the exact alignments with the Giza pyramids. And Robert Bauval said himself of Heliopolis site and Abu Sir pyramids, admittedly, the match is not mathematically perfect due to bedrock realities of geography and topography. The issue is, whereas the other sites are not mathematically perfect, it's clear that everything about the Great Pyramid, and the other Giza pyramids for that matter, are mathematically perfect. And it seems to me that if it was the true pyramid builders' intention to build more pyramids from the start, I believe the builders would have moved mountains, not only to make it a reality, but to make it perfect. For they clearly show us that it was within their capabilities, given the fact that they quite literally built a mountain, that is the Great Pyramid, and that meticulous planning and surveying certainly went into the engineering and construction of these monuments. From everything to do with architecture all the way to the great cosmic alignments it represented, the Great Pyramid is nearly perfect, and maybe it once was. And this is on Soul Ask. Please leave your comments, and thank you for your support. Please support my Patreon account. The daily posts are 5 videos daily, and they are totally different from what I have on my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for your support, and that you find all my content so interesting. You'll find the Patreon account details in the description box below.